said good morning, everybody, because my mind's still, I think, on Thanksgiving break. But welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending this panel. I'm Aaron Weinchink. I'm a professor of political science and also chair of the political science department. And so I get the fun task of engaging with some local legislators. And just as a quick note, one of our panelists is unable to make it today. So we'll just proceed with the two that we have. We have one Republican and one Democrat, which is really awesome. And so I just wanted to make a couple introductory remarks, and then I'll have the speakers introduce themselves so they can tell their story probably better than I can. And then we'll do some questions from me, and then we'll do some questions from you all, hopefully in the last 20 or 30 minutes. So first of all, I just wanted to thank you both for being here. I know that legislator's schedule can be very busy, so thanks for carving out a little time to answer some questions and share some of your experiences. I also wanted to just thank you for being on a panel where we have people of different political parties. I think that's really important for people to see legislators who maybe don't agree on every issue or any issue still being willing to be part of something. So thanks to both of you for participating. And what I thought would be fun is if you could just give us a maybe 2-3 minute introduction of yourself, kind of how you got to your current position, really anything you want to share about yourselves, and then we can dive into questions. And maybe we can start with Christina and then work our way down.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, for having us. Thank you to the organizers of this event and everyone for being here, whether you're here personally in person or on Zoom. We can't see anybody on Zoom, but I trust that you're there. I am Christina Shelton. I represent the 90th Assembly District, which is essentially the city of Green Bay. I was recently elected in November of 2020. It feels like a lifetime ago. In another way, it feels like it was just yesterday. Prior to this, I'm an educator by trade. I taught health and physical education in both the K-12 and higher education and community college. And then around 2016 here locally, got involved doing community advocacy, organizing and activism with Black Lives United, Women's March Wisconsin, and was working for a national nonprofit working with large urban school districts around school wellness policy. Within that work, I became really interested in the role that both local, state, and federal governments play in policy work, because I had been doing a lot of focus around school meals, recess, physical activity, and like wellness-based initiatives within large urban school settings. So what ended up happening was I was doing this community organizing, and there was an appointment open for the Green Bay School Board, and I wrote a letter to be considered. I thought that I had a particular voice and set of experiences that were not represented on the board. And I was selected for that appointment. And then I subsequently ran for that election for that seat in April of 2019. So last year or 2 years ago, I decided to run for the state assembly. Some of you may know the story. The representative who was in the 90th prior to me was a Democrat. And he was, it was reported that he sexually harassed a colleague in the state capitol. And I decided to primary, which is not very popular in your own political party, but I decided to do it because I felt like people deserve to have a choice of what type of representative they wanted to have. So I beat him in the primary and then went on to the November general election, and I'm here today. I have 2 kids. I have a 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. My husband is the chair of the Democracy and Justice Studies program here at UWGB. So this campus is really important to me. And some of my top legislative priorities continue to include public education and higher education, jobs in the economy, and healthcare. Obviously, we're going to talk about some of the topics today, but coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic has been a real challenge for us, especially those of us in our first term. And so just excited to be here, and thanks for having us, Aaron.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Senator Wimberger.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I'm Eric Wimberger, 30th Senate District, which is, well, Christina's district is one of the, each Senate district has 3 assembly districts inside of it. So the 88th, 89th, and 90th are the 3 inside the 30th. And so John Mocco, Christina Shelton, and then Elijah Benke. So basically a little bit south of De Pere, all the way up to Marinette, kind of snakes around by to Marinette. I'm from De Pere, and I guess in college, I went to college at St. Cloud State, really didn't have my act together, and just went there, ended up being the student body president there, but didn't have my act together to go to law school. So I took a year and drove a semi for Schneider and pulled off the side of the road, took the LSAT. And I went to Marquette for law school. And after law school, joined the Marine Corps as a judge advocate in the Marine Corps. And got back 2010, set up my law practice. I guess people thought that in 2016, that maybe I wasn't such a bad guy. And some people asked me to run for Senate in 2016 and with no money, no name recognition. But Dave Hansen was the senator then, got within a point of him, which was the closest anybody had gotten to him in the 20 years he'd been in office. So as a result, when 2020 rolled around, there was a kind of a grassroots groundswell on the Republican side to bring it back for 2020. So I ended up winning by 10 points. So it was an 11-point swing in those 4 years. But I guess that's kind of the 50,000-foot view of my last 25 years of my life. But that's how I got involved in politics. I believe I have my own understandings of what's true and right, and that's what we're going to talk about, how you determine that. But I think personally that because there's a difficulty understanding those things, that I try to focus on bigger picture things people can agree upon, roads and funding necessary things that are basic functions of government, and leaving people alone as much as possible. So I guess you could put me in the small government type of conservative for that reason, that everybody has a good idea. And I've seen it in the Marine Corps that, yeah, you can do a whole lot of things telling people what to do, but it isn't fun a lot of times, and it takes away a lot of people's rights. So that's kind of my perspective and worldview on it.
Cool, awesome, thanks. So I thought, again, we would just do like an hour of my questions and then 30 minutes on any questions that come up from the audience. And I interpret information and democracy really broadly. So these aren't all questions about what's true and best sources of information. A lot of them are about like interactions with constituents and how you decide among priorities. So that's kind of the view I take about the theme. But the first one I want to ask is something that I hear from like a lot of just people who are somewhat interested in politics, but don't really know where to go, which is like, where do I go to keep up with what you're doing? Or even if you want to interpret it as the entire state legislature, you know, I hear from people that there's almost too much information, right? They're overwhelmed by where to go to get good information about bills that are being introduced. So where does a constituent go to get information about what you're up to, what your priorities are? And you can go in whatever order you want.
Well, I think each person has their own little website through the legislative website. You have campaign websites, you can have all sorts of things, I suppose. What is it, legis.gov? Is that what it is? I don't like the way that's laid out myself. I always have a hard time finding anything. Yeah, I can't find anything on that thing myself, and I even know where it is. But even, I don't know what to say about that, except the information is out there, but you kind of have to have a little bit of a background on the information to be able to digest the information. And that primer kind of aspect of it isn't there. But I guess that you just got to pay attention to the news. There's WisPolitics. There's what are the other ones? There's what are the updates we get all the time on email? It's WisPolitics.
I think WisPolitics is one of the best.
Yeah, Wisconsin Eye. Yeah. And those are out there that to try and figure out where you're at.
So much information. I mean, I find it really difficult to stay up to date on information. If you miss, I don't know if you feel this when I'm driving back and forth to Madison, just even 2 hours in the car where I'm not on Twitter or Facebook or looking at the news, I get home and it's like, oh my gosh, I missed so much information. How do I catch up? And I think that's one of the biggest frustrations that the average person feels, is like information overload. And how do you find information that is reliable, that connects to the things you care about? And I want to do a little plug, because I feel like here in Green Bay, we have an explosion of really fantastic local news sources that are doing excellent reporting. I mean, the Press Gazette is just doing incredible work. We have the Press Times, which comes out weekly, that does like very local work. When I was on the school board, I was just really impressed by their journalists that would show up to school board meetings and do these very in-depth, detailed stories about our budget. And that was always difficult, right? Is how do you get this information out to people? And then of course we have the City Pages, which is this great, weekly newspaper. But I would pair all of this too with, the importance of information literacy for kids and adults, because that being able to parse through all of this and to know how to think critically and to sort of understand a slant from a story or what your news source is and where that perspective sort of comes in is really critical right now. Because yes, I have Twitter, I on Facebook, I spend a significant amount of time on social media because I connect with a lot of constituents that way. But I also recognize that people perceive that, whether right or wrong, to be slanted in a political sort of way because I'm a Democrat and I'm writing information in a certain way. So I do try to connect with constituents, but I think helping people to identify sources that they can trust, but also helping them understand how they can digest that information in a constructive way is really important. Because to get to the whole point of this conference around truth and democracy, those are ways that we can really combat some of the pervasive lies that are out there, especially on social media.
Awesome. So the next question is related to that one, and it is also, again, the constituent kind of interaction. But I'm curious, and I know you're both relatively new in your positions, but what's the best way for a constituent to get information to you? Like, say I'm really passionate about an issue and I want you to know something about it or do something about it. What's the best way for me to get to you? Like, should I come to your office physically? Should I send you a bunch of letters? Like, what's the best? What's the most effective? What catches your attention?
I think it really depends on what you want to get out of the information. I mean, if it's an official capacity where you want to advocate for a bill or an issue, or you're looking for support from our office on unemployment benefits or housing, that needs to go through our office. So that's where you would email the rep.shelton or, your official email. And that goes to our staff in our office in Madison, because we have staff that essentially do constituent services for people. And so I always tell people, if it's a specific need, contact the office. But if it's for just outreach or a question for me, or they want to give feedback. I mean, I look at Facebook on the comments, I look at Twitter, people send me texts, and I tell people all the time, I'm a regular person in the community, just like you. I have 2 kids and I'm available to you because I work for you. And that doesn't mean that, you can't just call me or text me or send me a Facebook message and I'll try to get back to you. But sometimes that can be hard to stay up on because there's so much information coming at us. But I tell people all the time, whatever the best way for you to communicate to us, it will get to us. Different people like, more formal or less formal, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to make sure that we're responding to as much as we possibly can in a timely way.
I wouldn't say the medium you use is important. It's the idea conveyed and the, I guess, authenticity behind it. That is the best way to make it happen, where you get bend someone's ear. If you're sending out a form letter and we see the same form letter 50 times because your interest group has told you to forward this email, I mean, there you have it. It's looked at once by staff and okay, noted. But when you get a real either letter or email that's something that's kind of heartfelt or had a lot of thought to it, that's something that is really, at least for me, is they forward it to me to address personally. So that's kind of the way to do it. To get a real genuine, I guess, interest from your legislator, have done the research, do the research. You have a problem, well, everybody has problems, but whether or not it takes a government solution or anybody else should be doing anything about it, think about that. Have a concept of how the interplay of things are working, and I think that the legislature might be able to do this, and it would affect all these people who are having this problem, and you'll get some attention that way, I think.
Can I add something to that? Because I
No.
really, you said it. Well, I'm going to agree with you. So maybe you'll feel different. But I like where you talked about authenticity, because I think that's really important too. I mean, the system of being in the legislature is very formal and it feels formal. And if you're on the outside looking in terms of how do you connect with us, I think it can feel intimidating and overwhelming. And I tell people all the time, like, just if you have an issue, just send us an email. It doesn't have to be this perfectly drafted formal email. Let us know what you need and we will get back to you and we will help you. And so I love that authenticity is really important.
Yeah, I like your point about at least have a suggestion for what we can do
Yeah.
about it. I always tell my class that if you have a problem that you're called my classes, if you have a problem, they probably agree that it's important, right? They probably think
Right.
poverty is a problem or unemployment's a problem, but they need something to go on. And so if you at least have a suggestion or a few ideas you've seen elsewhere, that's a big help to start formulating a policy response. If you just call and say, unemployment's high, I want that solved. Well,
Yeah.
you know, lots
Or
of
you're
people are
terrible.
concerned about that. Yeah, or you're horrible. Which
Yeah.
reminds me of a story you mentioned being authentic, and I always bring in I try to bring in different members of Congress. I had Representative Reed Ribble come in one time when he was serving. We've since become good friends, but he always told this story about how he got this scathing letter from a constituent, just cursing him out, and he actually knew that this person was going to be at an in-person meeting a month later or so, and he brought the letter and he read it out loud, and the person's face was bright red because they said things about him that they would never have said in person. So I like the point about the tone and the authenticity matter. You know, think about how you want to.
You gotta
present
know,
yourself.
I mean, you just gotta know what you're, before you go criticize someone, it's always best to know what you're talking about. That's not something I learned in the legislature. That's something I learned in court of law, is if you're gonna go saying that something is, and then you don't have any sort of evidence to back it up, or it's conjecture, or it's not logical, then then how you expect anybody to take it seriously or to think it through for you. So sometimes you have a problem, you don't know how to fix it, but you're able to describe it in a way you're not throwing bombs, then maybe you get people's attention better.
Yeah, so the next one is kind of building on that, but I think that there's this perception out there that, like, once politicians get elected, it's impossible to change their minds, right? It's like very hard to persuade people. I was wondering if, and again, I recognize you're just getting into this and you know, haven't served for that long. Is there any issue or topic where your mind has changed or you've moved a little bit, even if you haven't like completely flipped your position? Is there anything where, like, you know, you started to see it differently or you got new information? So I think it is really hard to, once you're attached to an idea, to change your mind, you know, for anybody, not just politicians. But is there anything where you like, or maybe you are just starting to think about it differently now?
I have a specific example. So
Go
I
ahead.
think it was the second month that I was in the legislature, we were on the assembly floor. And I can't remember exactly what the bill was because it was vetoed by the governor, but it was a Republican supported bill. Most of the Democrats were against it. And the basis of the bill was essentially in response to COVID, it would require the governor to create a plan to bring back state employees back to work. So what is that plan coming out of the remote work environment back into in-person? What does that look like? And, you know, I knew a number of Democrats are going to vote against it. And I think I, at the time, thought, yeah, I'll vote against this too. But the floor debate, there was some really great points that were just being made about the bill and by Republicans on the other side of my political aisle. And when it came down to vote, I thought, I'm going to vote for this. Like, this is a good bill, you know, and I texted my leadership because at the time we were in the stands because we were all socially distanced and we weren't all on the floor. And I said, hey, just heads up, I'm going to vote for this, you know. And it was really funny because when they were doing the vote tally, at the time we were doing a voice vote because we weren't in our seats to press the button. And I said, aye. And they paused like, what? And I said, yep, aye, you know, because everybody was so shocked that I had voted against my caucus and with the Republicans. And, you know, I survived it. It wasn't the end of the world for me. And I think those opportunities are really important for us to say, you know, I don't have to, this isn't like one side versus the other. I have to really take this information in and vote the way I felt like I need to vote. And, you know, it's really hard because in partisan politics, you are punished in a lot of ways if you don't vote with your caucus, or whether that's internally or in the community, that's a real thing. But I think it's really important that we have elected officials that are willing to kind of step out and step up when they feel like it's the right thing to do. And, you know, I'm here to tell the story. Like it wasn't the end of my life.
I can't say I've run into anything yet, but
I'm waiting for you.
yeah. But most things, I think that our caucuses operate a little differently. And I don't think it has anything to do with the party affiliation, but rather just the position within the legislature of being either in the minority or in the majority. So most things that get to the floor are already kind of hashed out in caucus. So listening to debate on the floor, you generally don't hear a whole lot of debate from Republicans because it's already kind of talked about beforehand. And I think that's just the nature of it. But if the Republicans were in the minority, then I think it might there might be a lot more talking and crossover in that sense too. But as far so the things that have come to the floor on the legislature have gotten a certain amount of mainstream support within the caucus. So I can't say that I've traveled or migrated too much on legislation.
Sure. This one actually came up when you made your introductory remarks, but it seems like on a lot of issues these days, people are sort of talking past each other. They're talking about different dimensions of a problem, or one is not even willing to recognize that something that somebody cares really deeply about exists. Have you encountered that? And I'm not just thinking about across parties, but maybe even within your own caucus where you really see a problem differently. And like, how do you navigate that or try to convince somebody like, this is the thing we need to focus on about this problem?
Yeah, it's my turn to go first. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. I've encountered that in the caucus because I'm the only attorney in the Republican caucus in the Senate. So when I start talking about things, I've caught a few issues that I think would have maybe been embarrassing situations. That you can't do that. That messes with the rules of evidence. You can't make this exception here. You can't. Don't you understand how this is going to change things? I would say that one that's been stubborn is the expungement package. So it's passed through Judiciary Committee, but that I'm on, but hasn't gotten to the floor. But expungement seems to be a bugaboo for people. For some people, because of what that might mean if you're soft on crime or whatnot. So it's hard to when people approach a situation, not being willing to take in new information. Then how do you then make the argument based on the new information if they're not willing to accept that there is the new information? But that's just the nature of persuasion. That it's not something unique to the legislature. It's a human behavior trait. So even if you want to say, even if someone wants to say, well, if things are expunged, then how's an employer supposed to know if they have a bad employee or not, or who to hire if they have a bad record? Well, you bring up, we're only talking about the first offense. And did you also know it's illegal to discriminate and use that anyway, that conviction anyway? And you try, and it just goes right over some people's heads there that you're not supposed to be using court records for that purpose anyway. So it's, but sometimes it just takes a few times for people to hear it. And it's everything's a work in progress. Some bills take 2 or 3 legislative cycles to kind of catch traction.
Did those people, when you caught those errors, did they eventually come around to thinking the way you were describing it was right? Or are you still
I don't
working
want
on
to breach
those?
any confidences, but it's everything. It seemed like expungement was gaining a lot of traction, and Alberta Darling was the champion, or is the champion of that for several years now. I want to say for about 10 years. So over the course of the 10 years, she's made some headway with that, and I've been able to explain some of the legal side of that, particularly because I'm a criminal defense attorney. But then you have circumstances that kind of also put a wrench in the issues. You have when there's crime, when there's skyrocketing crime, when there's riots and looting in Kenosha. Now it starts to go towards pure law and order, and expungement is off the table. So sometimes an idea is put in the recycling bin because of particular individual circumstances that are unique to politics.
Christina?
So I think there's a couple things here. One is, it's important that we recognize that every experience and identity and expertise that people bring to the table influences how they perceive their reality. And that's why it's so important for us to have relationships with one another, because that contextual understanding of how someone understands an issue can help us to make sure that we're not speaking past each other. I tell this story a lot, but I come from a very large family. My parents are both one of 10. My dad's the oldest of 10. My mom's number 6. So I have like 65 first cousins. And I have an aunt and an uncle and a family member on every side of every issue. And what I think has helped me to be able to understand context and to talk to people and not talk past them, but to see it from their perspective and to be empathetic to finding some common ground and a shared value, is that I had to do it for years. I mean, I had to sit at a dinner table, at a Thanksgiving table with aunts and uncles where we hashed out every political issue, religious issue. My grandmother voted for Clinton and my grandfather voted for Trump, right? They're still married, they still argue, but they love each other and they come back, and it's not always pretty, but we continue to do the work. And I think as a society, that's what we have to do. It's hard. We're going to make mistakes. Sometimes we say things we shouldn't say, but we have to build the political muscle to be able to have these conversations. But within these conversations, they have to be grounded in a shared common value. And that's what I try to do with people who I disagree with, is to say, what is the common truth that we both share here? And then from that point out, we can talk about the solutions or the way that we can deconstruct the issue, because then it doesn't feel so personal, right? If we both agree that public education is really important, then we know that we're both working from the inside out. And then from that place, it's just strategy, which we can disagree on strategy. But it's really hard right now for folks, because I think it's harder and harder to find that common value, but I believe that it's purposeful and I believe that it's important. And we have to be having these conversations in our homes and in our communities at our dinner table, because these issues aren't going away. And if we pretend that they're not happening, or we talk past one another, or we yell at one another, we won't be able to address them head on, which is absolutely what we have to do. I mean, we're facing some of the most deep crises of our time. And that means that this work is going to be really hard. And that means sometimes you're not going to have the best idea, and you're going to walk away from the dinner table feeling really maybe stupid, but you got to keep coming back to it. And we have to practice forgiveness for others and for ourselves, because if you do this, you're going to be imperfect. That's just the nature of the game.
That's a perfect segue to my next question.
I set you up for that.
This isn't a question necessarily about information, but it's something I want to know about. And I'm guessing you have felt the effects of this, but polarization, in my view, is one of the dominant themes in American politics, and especially in the Wisconsin state legislature, where if you look at all the data on ideological positions of parties, Wisconsin's in the top 10 year after year. I was wondering if you had any ideas on things you might think might help foster more collaboration across the parties. And I'll just give you one example of kind of something I've seen pitched at the US Congress level. There's some thought that, like, in the 50s and 60s, members of Congress used to socialize with each other more outside of the legislature. And that was really good for collaboration, because getting to know someone and their family and, going to dinner with them, it helps you see like they're a real person and they have kids they care about. And so one thought on how to deal with polarization is like, maybe we need more informal socialization. So do you think that there's anything like that that could be implemented or employed in the state legislature? I know there is collaboration sometimes, but I think people want more of it than what they're getting. At least that's what data suggests. Do you have any ideas or observations about polarization? Either can start.
Am I going first?
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. I mean, it's funny. You know, I think when I was elected in January, you have to remember everything was virtual, right? I mean, and so relationships is the name of the game in politics. Who you know, how you know them, having a beer, having a glass of wine, having a coffee. Again, that's that context that I just talked about. Who are they? Why do they care about what they care about? What are their values? How do I work with them? I love collaborating. I'm a collaborator and like connector by nature. So I love talking to people and thinking, oh, that person really cares about this. So if I want to work on the issue, I'm going to go to them and we're going to maybe elevate on a project. But I heard stories like in years past of, you know, softball games and, you know, the Republicans and the Democrats going out to afterwards and doing, you know, joint holiday parties. And we don't do any of those things anymore. So I think there are some social strategies that can be employed, but I think there are a couple like bigger issues here. One is we are a gerrymandered state, and that level of gerrymandering does not incentivize politicians to work with one another. It disincentivizes that work. I am in a packed Democratic district. It's a 60-40 split. So do I work and try to represent everyone in my community? I absolutely do. In fact, I was just messaging yesterday with a devout Republican in my district, and he and I were messaging each other. And I said, hey, I really respect you. I don't agree with you, but I really respect you on this issue. And he said the same. So I do try to do that, but it's really hard because when you're in a packed district or you're in a cracked district, then really you're not as accountable for being willing to work across the aisle. And the other thing I want to say too is something around publicly funded elections and campaigns. I believe at the federal level, we need to overturn Citizens United. Money in politics plays a significant role in how people show up for work or don't show up to work. I would love to see us have publicly funded elections where everyone, whoever we decide to set it up, you know, receives a certain amount of money, and that we're not spending so much time fundraising and asking people for money. Because unfortunately, that does play a role in how we show up in the legislature every day. But certainly it's an issue. And you know, to go back when you were talking about Elijah Benke, who was in the 89th, he and I got pizza back in May with our partners, and we had pizza at Rustique out in Howard Swamico. It was lovely. We had a great time. Do we agree on everything politically? No, but I got to know him and his wife, and that makes it really nice because again, even if we disagree, I still think that he's a good person at heart, and I know he's a family person. And so those are the types of relationships I want to cultivate too with individual members of the legislature.
I would say that the distinction nowadays from years past is probably the idea of characterizing or imposing an identity on people in a very casual and fickle way. So, and what I mean by that is, if you say something seemingly innocuous, twist the word, and 5 minutes later you're an hysterophobe on social media. So you're not going to, you're just simply not going to engage. So I see a lot of that go on, that there just simply isn't anything but formal communication because of a possible spurious accusation. I'm talking from the perspective of a Republican. There might be the same the other way around, but at least from a conservative perspective, if you use one word improperly, you're going to be on social media being called an hysterophobe of some kind. So you have to make a calculation. So there's no drinking, hanging out under those conditions.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of my favorite things that happens when I bring in guest speakers. I try to bring in all kinds of people. I've had Tom Petre, Reed Ribble, Dave Obey, all kinds of people from all different places in the ideological spectrum. And my favorite thing is like when they come in, oftentimes students who were like initially, I don't like a Republican or I don't like a Democrat, once they hear the person and they hear their explanation for what they're like, I can see why they like that. I find that very convincing. It's like, you know, once you kind of get to interact with somebody, you're often like, I see where they're coming from. I believe that they're a good person, you know, and we often operate on these caricatures of like, oh, they're a Democrat, so they're an idiot, or they're a Republican, they're an idiot, right? And that's been, for me personally, like I've brought in politicians, I'm like, I don't think that person's going to be very good. And then I end up being like good friends with them because I come to see why they view why they have certain views and what their values are. So yeah, I think that's great. I also wanted to ask you about the role of social media, but not in like government regulation and whether government should be regulating, but it seems so easy to say things that are untrue about policies or ideas or politicians. And so I was just wondering like how you contend with that as somebody who wants, I assume, people to have accurate information about what you're up to and what you believe. And I'm sure you've seen it all in comments people have made about you on social media, probably even directly to you on social media. But how do you contend with that? Or how do we as a society contend with the easiness of spreading information that's not true about people or ideas?
Well, I don't think it's unique to our age, first of all. What was it? The Quincy Adams and Jackson campaign is seen as the worst there was. And in the way olden days, there were each political party had newspapers, there were affiliated newspapers and everywhere making up just allegations, period. And it was really only post World War II where it kind of narrowed down, but there was the Spanish-American War was started with a claim that there's a ship blown up in Havana, right? I want to say so, and that probably didn't happen. It was an exploding boiler. And was there in the Mexican-American War? Was there really a shot at the border? And Abe Lincoln was the one who lost his seat in Congress because he confronted. Was it Taylor was the president at that time? But regardless, confronted the president. And he said, you know, this show me the spot where blood was spilled. So there's all sorts of conjecture. There's all sorts of people making allegations all the time, and newspapers hyping that, media hyping that. The alternative is to do what the founders knew with England, that you can just have limited press and have an official paper like Pravda, just have an official newspaper, and that will be the truth. But if you go that way, then people in power can put their thumb on the scale or just read it out. So the solution was not to restrict information, but to maximize it. And somewhere along the way, the truth can kind of get rise to the top there. And so more speech, the better. Not because each person is going to tell the truth or even have the ability, the knowledge base to tell the truth, but that looking through the various types of media, it comes forth. I don't think that Twitter and Facebook and all that are really going to be a problem as long as the speech is not restricted. It's only when the restrictions come that which in my opinion there are some that are not appropriate, but they're private organizations, obviously. But the more information, the better, and then the cream kind of rises to the top with that. I don't think there's any other way really to go about it.
So, you know, social media is both a beautiful and very useful device, and also incredibly harmful at the same time. And I think we can hold two opposing ideas in our head at the same time and recognize that it's a tool that we have to learn to use, and that tool requires a level of skill and coaching and understanding of how you use it for good. And it's very easy for any of us to be angry because of all of the information that is out there at any given time. And to get on social media and sort of like let it rip. And to your point about, would you say that to someone's face? I think probably I don't know if there's a single person that I know that would say they never went on social media and said something that they wish they wouldn't have said. And so the way that I try to use social media for myself is to recognize that I'm not there to create more division. I'm there to put forward ideas and to engage with people. And sometimes that works out, oftentimes it does, but there are certainly people that show up on social media and in threads and on Twitter and on Facebook that have no intention of being there and trying to be a good faith, constructive constituent to engage around a topic. So it's really hard. I think one of the things that I've learned when I was on the school board was I was very transparent about my school board votes and my school board work on Facebook. And when I would have to take a hard vote, such as, I remember a few years ago, we were taking a vote around health insurance and maybe increasing teachers' rates for health insurance. And I can't remember even how I voted or what I decided, but I remember it was very contentious. And I came home after the school board meeting and I typed up a fairly lengthy Facebook post. And I said, this is why I voted the way I voted. Anyone that has any questions for me, please let me know. I'm happy to sit down with anyone and talk with them. And for the most part, that feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Even people who disagreed with me wanted to just understand the position that I took. So I've tried to use that in the same tool, but it is very hard. I mean, there are times where on Facebook, I will, comment on something and someone will take it out of context, screenshot it and put it on a bunch of Facebook pages. And it's Sunday morning and I'm drinking coffee with my kids and I open up my phone and there's like 1,000 notifications and you're like, I really wish that wouldn't have happened. But it is, you have to take the good with the bad, but it's certainly challenging for sure when you're in leadership, especially now.
Yeah, just to your point on authenticity and communicating, one of the best lessons I ever learned, actually this is from an elected official I brought in who had faced some criticism and stuff like that. He said, if you're angry about something at work or with a politician, write the email, but don't send it, save it as a draft, come back to it a couple of days later and read it again and see if that's really how you want to present yourself. And I found myself doing that sometimes, usually in the context of work, where it's like something really has me worked up and I'll write it out and then I'll come back and a lot of times I'm like, no, that's not the way to communicate that point, right? It's too aggressive.
Right.
And so I wish people would do more of that, I think. Yeah,
and I think there's an incentive, a perverse incentive for people to be aggressive and divisive on social media, just for the sake of being, divisive, to get likes or to get feedback or to have people sort of pile in. I think when you were talking earlier about like using certain language, the call out culture of social media of, you said this one thing and now we're going to pile on and sort of, you're not welcome here ever again. That's a real thing. And it stifles creativity. It stifles curiosity. It stifles just sort of our human nature of trying to work through complicated issues. And if we don't, we have to give space to people to also like mess up and say, hey, that's not, this is hard. We're gonna sort of keep at it and keep trying.
Awesome. I have more questions, but I want to make sure we get time for any audience questions. So why don't maybe we can just do hands and I'll call on people who have questions, then we can circle back if we have time to a few of my last questions. But any questions? It would be great if they were ones that were general enough where both of our panelists could weigh in rather than a question about a specific bill that was introduced by one of you. So more general would be better, but interpret the theme broadly: information, democracy, truth.
So this morning we had an interesting, first, thank you for being here. But we had a forum, it was more like a round table, talking about misinformation and mental health. And the topic came up of how all of the misrepresentation of mental health leads to these stigmas, like self-stigma, stigmas from your friends and family, and they can work their way all the way up to political stigmas, and how much that goes towards But to combat the misinformation that feeds into the stigma that's rampant, social media is a big culprit of that. It would require not the emotional systems that social media, even some news outlets are now sort of happening. There's emotional sort of triggering, highly quick, generating large numbers, not necessarily people, but contemplative, looking at the data, really understanding, being able to understand information, or maybe affinity, or generating. And what it looks like is it's really come down to a systemic of our schools. We're allowing ourselves to be enamored by this quick, emotionally driven, high volume number type of system, which is not allowing that contemplative sort of perspective to be created. So how do you see politics now sort of embracing this dynamic? Do you adjust your method of giving information to the public based on those emotional triggers? Or do you think you should be pushing people to really deeply understand more than just by sort of bending to the system that's available? Because I think it kind of looks like a vicious circle that's emerging. We're trying to get more simple and presenting ideas that don't have a whole lot of data back behind it, and then people want to use that information to justify their beliefs. But there isn't a lot of substance behind it. So, I guess where do you see the most sort of fruitful resources being applied to change that? I think some would argue that the way that the system is running now is starting to gain traction in regards to not listening to it. And social media programs are built for that.
Yeah, you want me to go longer? Go ahead.
Well, that's always been the problem. I don't think it's anything new. Like just the more you learn and try to educate yourself, the more you just see it. But I don't think that's a new dynamic of people coming up with their understanding of things. And no one is going to have a complete understanding, and that's why they call it having a different perspective, I suppose. One of the things that was interesting to me in the last couple of years was the use of alternative facts, and I saw that in the email, and how everybody freaked out about that term in particular. And that it was interesting to me because we use that term in the courts all the time. There's the proposed facts, and then there's the alternative facts. And since people have limited capacities, that's just the nebulous aspect of life generally, that what is true and what is right is very difficult to discern, no matter how you slice it under whatever circumstances. And that's why you have adversarial judicial proceedings in court, not because the jury knows what is right or what is true that happened. You're afforded process, you're not afforded truth in the courts. And the same with politics, you're not afforded truth or right so much, you're afforded your vote in the process to get someone with a particular perspective in. And all you can rely on are really empirical data as best as you can. Hopefully the people you elect are focused on empiricism rather than emotional reactions. And that's not always the case for everybody who's in any circumstance. They rely on their emotional feelings about things rather than empiricism. I think one of the largest failings that kind of comes and goes is a resurgence of a postmodern belief in the idea that there is no objective truth. So a switch from objectivism to subjectivism. So if I'm trying to find the truth and someone else is trying to find their truth, you hear that one. What is their truth? What is their lived experience? You are never going to meet on the same plane, because I'm not concerned about what your particular understanding is, except to possibly get to the objective truth. And if the objective truth isn't your personal understanding, then I'm not really all that concerned about it. So when you switch from a society that's concerned about objectivism and trying to find the truth, it's much easier to then come to a consensus on a right thing to do, or to be focused more on empirical studies than if everybody has their own truths and we're just in this room together talking about stuff. So I think maybe that's a bit of a resurgence in society, that the rejection of objectivism. But I think there's enough people out there yet who believe that there is a truth, and talking about it kind of gets there.
I don't know how to follow up with that. Such a good question. And there's a million ways you could answer it. I think the first thing is recognizing this is addictive. And we have to do a better job of figuring out with not only ourselves, but in society, how we're going to use it and how we use it as a tool and how we help our kids to be able to use it. I have a 10 and a 13-year-old. I'm constantly walking around my house going, put your phone down, right? And as I have my phone in my hand, because it's an incredible tool that gives us so much information at the drop of a hat. You don't even get to have debates at the bar anymore about, who won the Super Bowl in 1987, because you can just pull it up on Google and there it is, right? But I think your point about schools is really important, civic and education, understanding the whole child, recognizing that math and reading is important in public schools, but it has to be more, that we have to educate the whole child through nutrition and physical activity and the arts and social studies and critical thinking and debate, and really get back to that critical, to sort of that social construct of public education, rather than just an information of memorize these facts and here you go. And I think we're seeing that teachers are trying to get back to that, but to combat the misinformation and the disinformation out there is incredibly difficult. And I will tell you that one of the ways I think we can combat that is by getting out of our bubble and having relationships with people in our community that don't just look and sound and with the same expertise that we all have. As I mentioned earlier, I have family members who are very, very conservative Republicans on the political spectrum. And yet they don't believe that because I'm a Democrat, I'm sex trafficking children. That's a lie that's out there. That's a disinformation and misinformation that's out there. That's incredibly destructive and violent language, but because they know me, we have a relationship with each other. It helps to balance and counter that level of language. So, but it is incredibly difficult, and it's certainly a concern, because even more than ever before, each side, the way that we talk about each other is that the other side is evil. And if we think the other side is evil, then how do we come together? And the answer is we won't.
Can I circle back on I thought of something that I switched my mind on. And it's pertinent to your question. After the 2020 election, it didn't go smoothly. So I was very skeptical about fraud, direct fraud, using names that were on purge lists. And so the things that were going on in the election, rules halfway through, and just guidance from Elections Commission. didn't smell right. Now I try to temper myself. Like I said before, I've been in where other people's lives have been at my my rhetorical abilities are, responsible for people's destinies in court. So I usually keep it cool and try to gather facts. But I thought for sure there's got to be some sort of fraud here, just on the nature of this purge list. But as long as you're willing to accept new information, these allegations spread out. The purge list, there's 400 or 200,000 names on it, and were those names used to then change the election? Someone was asking for an absentee ballot, putting somebody else's name on it, and then sending it back. And it seemed plausible. Well, you have people on this purge list. So a 4-year automatic purge, meaning that if you don't vote for 4 years, this is the law in Wisconsin. If you don't vote for 4 years, your name's kicked off and you have to re-register. Now, it's same-day registration in Wisconsin, so it's not disenfranchising anybody. It's just so people can't use names and go through the graveyard type of thing and use names. So when you have people on a 4-year purge list, were those names on the 4-year purge list that were signed up in 2016 or before used in 2020? Well, the day after the election, turns out all those names were purged. So nobody used those names fraudulently, and those people didn't show up at the polls, because if they had, their names would have been thrown back in the 4-year hopper and be actually subject to purge in 2024. So once you find that out, whole thing is doesn't make any sense anymore. Now, it would have been helpful for people extremely knowledgeable about elections to simply say that, because I said that to you in a minute and a half and dispelled the whole thing. It also didn't help when Democrats who did know that just said, "You're a conspiracist, big lie," instead of explaining it. And I think those, when you're not willing to explain your position before getting vicious, and you're also not open to accepting new facts, I think those are some of the big problems. And I think all you can do is just have forums talk about it, and eventually it starts to rise. You know what I mean?
I think that's really important too, when elites point out that they believe something and then they got new information and their views change. Actually, one of the things I try to do is bring people of different parties together at the same time. But around the time of the election, Reed Ribble, myself, and a former Democratic U.S. Senator actually wrote an op-ed where we pointed out some things about the election that we all agreed were not true.
Yep.
And so I think it's really important to say things like you said, I initially thought this, here's why. It turns out when I got the evidence, it just wasn't there for that
There's
claim.
still a lot of other things that I don't like about that, but about the election, but that particular issue of directly using names fraudulently can be disproven just by some simple logic and investigation.
Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, great question, Herb. Thanks for asking that. But any other questions?
What's your standard for truth? So to put it another way, when you come across a new piece of information, how do you determine, or what are the kind of processes you go through, or the criterion that you apply to determine, do I believe this? Should I give this some weight? Is this something that I should dismiss? Especially pertaining to information that maybe comes from a perspective that you disagree with, or things of that nature. How do you then determine, like, what's your standard as to how to decide, yeah, this is important, I should care about this and give this some attention and maybe allow it to change my perspective?
What's your name?
Drew?
Drew. Oh, Drew.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was you.
Yep.
Your hair was longer.
So, yeah.
It's good to see you.
You too.
Yeah.
I think this is actually the first time, like,
We ran against each other last year.
we did.
Yeah,
It was,
it's good to see you, man.
You too.
Yeah.
I found an impartial arbiter on the internet. That's how I decide.
Just everything you encounter, you just said.
Snopes, PolitiFact.
I think that's it's a critical question that we have to do a better job of considering as people are thrown so much information every single day. I mean, I think for me, it's always questioning the source of the information, the institution, what the institution itself positions itself to care about, and sort of their mission. What's their interest or non-interest in the information that they're putting out? What's the angle? You know, if it's, you know, the Legislative Audit Bureau or like one of the, you know, institutions in the Capitol, that resonates is going to resonate more because those are the nonpartisan groups that help us to do our job. I look to local news here to help me better understand, and having good relationships with reporters and journalists. So if I have questions, I can reach out to them. But it's also having people on the ground too, that sort of, you know, maybe it's not like an institutional truth, but a personal truth of what they're going through and their story and that narrative and how they're sort of impacted every day. So I think it just depends too on sort of what that truth is and how you're using it and how it's informing your decision making. But certainly, I mean, anything that someone just tells me at face value, I mean, it's always good to make sure that we're double checking. I mean, I'm constantly doing that if we're on panels or I'm talking to people. If I'm not sure, I'll say, you know, I'm not sure, don't quote me on this, but I think it's this, right? But just doing your homework and sort of staying up on the statistics and stuff is really important. But yeah, it's a lot of information to keep up with. For sure.
I familiarize myself with logical fallacies and just recognize them. So when the response from someone is simply, "Oh, don't believe him, he's just trying to whatever," or well, all of the scientists agree, that's called an argument to authority. Or you look for ad hominems. This person possessed a something or other. That means he must be one of these. You look for these. That's the red herring right there. That's the red flag that there's some manipulation going on. Everybody's going to have their own desires and agendas, priorities. So bias by omission, you know, you got to worry about those things. Why is someone even talking about something unless it was important to them? So you just, I always look for logical fallacies of various types. And if you don't have some pretty good premise, therefore X, and then be willing to hear the counter example of, well, okay, therefore that, but what about that? If they're not engaging in a dialogue like that, then maybe what they're saying isn't exactly true. But you can ferret things out by asking the right questions and being aware of rhetorical tactics.
Other questions? Can I ask one more? We have like 10 minutes left. Can I ask
Sure.
one more? This was just kind of designed to be my wrap-up question, but I was wondering if you had any advice for people who are like thinking about getting into public life or just even like political activities, not necessarily running for office. Because I know a lot of students, they have the skills, I think, necessary, and they have an interest, but they maybe are a lot reluctant because they think I need to be extroverted, but I'm introverted. You know, I've had people come up to elected officials after and say, like, I really want to do this, but I'm super shy. Do you have any advice for like people who are toying with the idea of running for office or just even getting involved maybe in a political party or an interest group, or like what are their first steps? What advice would you have for them, since you obviously have taken those steps and you're into politics and you've run for office and serve? What would your advice be to somebody who's young and starting off thinking about politics?
Everybody has a different style. Excuse me. Everybody has a different style, and everybody has a different path in life. So what's going to work for me to be persuasive isn't going to work for other people. I'm like I said, I'm a Marine JAG, and I have to wear ties with flowers on them to, take the edge off my personality sometimes. 'Cause I have an icy gaze that I get from my father. But so everybody's different. Everybody's introverted, extroverted. But the thing that comes through as far as like leadership or going to make you valuable is you have to have something in your background, in my opinion. I mean, there are people who make it in politics without having really accomplished much. But if you go around and prove yourself as having a varied experience in life and some intelligence and competence, those things are going to come through. But the thing that's going to also come through is your ability to lead. And leadership is not being boisterous and barking orders and telling people what to do. Leadership is understanding a common goal and then also understanding the people around you and their individual strengths. Geez, thanks. Tough word. Their individual strengths, and weaknesses, and then finding a place for those people in the endeavor that takes advantage of that, and then everybody feels as if they're part of a common thing together. So when you're able to understand that and not put everybody in the same mold, that everybody needs to be alpha male, and everybody going out and conquering the hill, but everybody can play a part if you just find a nice part for them. Then people are going to seek you out to be a leader.
I think the first thing is to remember that public service is about service to others and not to yourself. That's why giving back is so important. If you are centering your own ego and your own outcome or your own profession, that is a quick step in the wrong direction. And so I think if you remember that and you seek out things that inspire you, things that you love, things that you care about, things that concern you, and you go to others and you try to build those relationships with people and you try out many different things. There are many different ways, as you said, to get involved. It doesn't have to be running for office. It could be, but it doesn't have to. It could be on a campaign. It could be volunteering at a food bank. It could be running your department here, or moderating this panel, or organizing a coat drive in your community. There are so many ways that we can give back. And I think what I tell young people all the time is, you have your own story to tell, and I cannot tell you how to get to where you want to be, but don't be afraid to try out things that may not go anywhere. I did many things in my life that didn't necessarily lead to a destination, but are now a part of who I am and the experiences that I have sitting here. I'm a certified yoga instructor. I have my 200-hour yoga instructor. I don't teach anymore, but it influences how I understand the world around me. I'm a mom. I'm an activist and a community member. And so how I got to where I am now is my story, but that can't necessarily be replicated in somebody else's life. And so to what Senator Weinberger said too, is we need everybody doing all the things, right? And in social movements, we need people to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We need people to host. We need people to bring waters. We need people to speak. And so find a place for you and show up. That's the most important thing, is to show up in service of others. And if you do that and you do that in a good faith effort, it's worth it, because you'll meet so many amazing people and build a community around you that will carry you to places that you never even knew were possible.
Yeah.
And what you see is a few wins when you look at people who are what you would consider having won an election or whatever. There's a couple wins there, but the failures along the way, tremendous. I didn't get into schools I wanted. I didn't get offered jobs. I lost in 2014, lost in 2016. These things, it's you only tout your accomplishments,
Yeah.
But people recognize even if you're failing, as long as you're failing in the right way, like you didn't give up, and you didn't give up on yourself, you didn't give up on others. It's not necessarily a failing that's all that bad. So don't be afraid to fail. Just learn from it.
Yeah.
Pick yourself up.
Yeah, I like the point both of you made about we all have skills that are relevant. Your skills in law, or you mentioned a specific example where you catch things that other people don't catch. That's a
Right.
unique skill. You're on a committee that's totally relevant to what you do. You mentioned your background in health. That's relevant to how you think about different issues. So you can take any background and connect it to things going on in the legislature. I mean, I know John's not here today, but I know he's very passionate about budgeting and financial issues, given his background in that and his business experience in that area. So there's lots of things that are relevant to the legislature or the school board or the county board. So I appreciate those comments.
Sure.
Any last questions before we wrap up?
Well, your question was, what can especially a young person do to get involved with both these? That's great. But just like concrete steps within one fall.
Oh, let me tell you a story from the olden days, 1996. Is when I got involved, and I started the Brown County Young Republicans. It's a political action committee, and and there was just me doing that.
Is there a picture?
Probably me in a sweater vest somewhere.
That's
But it was Bob Dole campaign and Dave Prosser was running for Congress, and there really wasn't any functioning party in Brown County at the time. So you just got to call around our usual suspects. At the time, it was the Bob Dole campaign. And so you just don't be afraid to be awkward. Everything's awkward. It's only overcoming yourself that then you start to get, if things stop feeling strange and you're not failing anymore, then you're probably not pushing yourself, and you're going to start missing important things. So make it awkward. I mean, don't make it awkward, but don't be afraid to be in an awkward situation. Just go out there, but the usual suspects. You just call campaigns and call legislators and call parties, ask around. If you're talking about getting involved in politics, anyway. They'll find a spot for you right away. They'll have you handing out stuff tomorrow.
I think what's exciting about Northeast Wisconsin is we're really seeing an explosion of people invested in local communities. So there's really no shortage of issues that you can get involved in. We have the LGBTQ plus roundtable that meets, and there's a group that meets at what is the place, the LGBTQ bar that's on the east side. They meet monthly on the first Thursday of every month, so people can go and sort of network there and find community. Casa Alba Melanie downtown works with the Latino community. Voces de la Frontera is also here, so you can get involved with them. The YWCA of Greater Green Bay works to eliminate racism and empower women. So they have that really beautiful intersectionality of racism and feminism. Of course, we have the county parties. We also have the Equal Rights Commission, which was just founded recently by Mayor Gingrich, that's doing some really great work on inclusion, equity, and diversity. Actually, my husband is on that committee, and it's really cool. They just increased their human rights score significantly, which is really great. But I think honestly, what I did when I started back, years ago, is I was really interested, especially after the murder of Philando Castile in Minnesota. I saw an article by now my good friend Robin Tinnen, who runs the African American Resource Center, that We All Rise, and this beautiful article about her and the work that they were doing with Black Lives United. And I reached out to her directly and I said, I love what you're doing. How can I help you? What can I do? And it started off as a yearly fundraiser where I ran a back to school backpack drive fundraiser for them to source funding to give back to the Black community. And that relationship has blossomed over 6 years, that now, she's running a nonprofit and I'm doing this work and we're still supporting one another. So just say, pay attention to what's going on in the news and don't be afraid to reach out and ask how you can directly get involved. But there's a lot of cool stuff going on.
Yeah, if I could just add on, I love the local parties idea. You're right. They're always, I went to an event at a party one time and they were like, do you want to run for office? And I was like, you don't even know anything about
Yeah.
me. You're asking me
love
today if I want to run for
You're like, I
office.
won't be back.
Parties, all the organizations you mentioned, nonprofits, we have a ton of nonprofits, but also think about, you don't necessarily have to run for office to serve in government. So I serve on the Green Bay Ethics Committee,
Mhm.
which is appointed by the city council and mayor. And so you could think about something like that. They have all kinds of
Commissions.
commissions and committees. There's stuff related to parks and recreation.
Yeah.
There's like, if you have something you care about, there's probably a local institution relevant to it. I have a student right now. I have one student who's on the county board and one who's running for a seat on the county board. So think about those more local level positions too, rather than just, jumping straight in and running for Congress or something like that. There's a lot of good ways to get your feet wet.
But can I add one other thing? Sorry about
Yeah.
all, and I think that's such a good point, because I know a lot of times those positions go unfilled. But there's a real level of privilege here too of who can do this, because this is usually volunteer work, takes up a lot of time. And so I have been challenging a lot of organizations too, to see if there's ways to compensate people for time, whether it's through like memberships or it's in-kind donations or whatever it could be, because I know that that's something that I had experienced as a mother whenever I was trying to get involved was, I want to do all these great things, but I also need to pay my bills. And so we have to figure out ways to make sure that we provide opportunities to all working people, because oftentimes what ends up happening is it ends up being older, retired folks who have the capacity, but we really need to make sure we have an inclusive, diverse set of voices at the table. And until we sort of build in those structural supports, it is difficult for a lot of people to sort of volunteer or to participate in the way that they would like
Yeah,
to.
the cool thing now is we do a lot of our meetings on Zoom. And so I think there might be a push to do like a few, once we get more back to normal, to do some in person and some on Zoom. So it makes it a little bit easier.
Yes,
Doesn't
right.
overcome the pay thing, but we have a meeting coming up. It'll be completely on Zoom. So people will be
You
able
can
to
be home
do
with
it.
your kids.
Yeah, do it from home. So
Yeah.
I think that might help in the future.
Yep.
Last call. We're at our time. We're 2 minutes shy of our time. Well, maybe you could join me in thanking our panelists. I'm sure that they would love to say hello to you
Yeah.
if you're on your way out or you want to come up and introduce yourselves. But thank
We
you
should get
again for your time. Again, I know you have busy schedules and lots of people asking you to do all kinds of things. So really appreciate you making it out here on a snowy day.
Thanks for having
Thanks
us.
for
Aaron.
having us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
appreciate it. We should get, we want to get a